1944, the North Atlantic, our 17th War Patrol. My name is Thomas McCormick, a sonar operator aboard the U.S. Navy submarine Mullet. If you've never spent 72 consecutive hours 300 feet below the surface, never heard every inch of water outside the hull pressing in with enough force to crush steel, then you'll never understand this. Down in the deep, reality itself is a lie. Let me be clear. What I'm about to tell you, I've only ever told my wife, and only once, in the past 78 years. It was a rainy night in 1962. We were in our farmhouse in Vermont, the fire in the hearth burning strong. I thought that after 3 glasses of bourbon, I could finally say it out loud. But after I did, she barely spoke to me for 3 days. Not because she was afraid of me, but because she didn't know how to face a single fact, that she had married a man who, one night in 1944, 300 feet beneath the North Atlantic, saw something that was never meant to exist in this world. And now I'm going to say it again. Not because I'm ready, but because I know that people of my generation, the ones still alive, are almost gone. When we're all gone, this will be buried with us at the bottom of the sea. And I, Thomas McCormick, 92 years old, former U.S. Navy sonar man, don't want it to sink into silence. February 17, 1944. North Atlantic. Coordinates roughly 48 degrees north, 32 degrees west. Our submarine, the Mullet, SS-287, a Gatto-class boat, was under the command of Lieutenant Commander Harold E. Mitchell. This wasn't our first patrol. It was our 17th. If you know anything about submarine warfare, you'll understand that by that stage of the war, the German Navy's Wolfpack tactics had begun to break down, but the North Atlantic was still deadly. U-boats were still lurking beneath those cold, gray-green waves, their sonar listening for us, their torpedoes waiting. Our mission was a standard commerce raiding patrol. We had departed from the naval submarine base in New London, crossed the tenuously controlled Atlantic convoy lanes, and pushed deep into enemy waters to hunt and sink anything flying the Nazi flag. Mitchell was an old-school Navy man, quiet, reserved, but every order he gave landed like a nail driven into steel. He'd served aboard this boat for 3 years. Crewmen came and went, but those who stayed all knew one thing. Your odds of making it home under Mitchell were about 20% higher than on any other boat. But that time, 20% meant nothing. Let me give you some context first. Submarine warfare, especially in World War II, was unlike anything else. We weren't like those guys charging across the Pacific with aircraft carriers. We fought underwater, in darkness, beneath millions of tons of seawater. You've probably seen those Hollywood scenes, sonar operators shouting, "Torpedoes starboard!" and the captain calmly ordering, "Hard to port," the submarine slipping away at a graceful angle. Let me tell you, that's not real. In reality, when you're submerged, your senses are systematically stripped away. You can't see the sky. You can't see the sun. You can't see anything to orient yourself. The only things you can rely on are your instruments: sonar, periscope, depth gauge, compass. And everything they tell you is just data, not reality. You never actually see what that data represents. You just have to believe it. But belief is one thing. When what you're hearing, those sounds, fall completely outside your training, your experience, everything you understand about the world, belief becomes a fragile thing. We submerged at around 1,400 hours on February 17th, not because of a threat, but as part of a routine tactical maneuver in our patrol zone. Winter in the North Atlantic, short days. By 3 in the afternoon, the light was already fading. Mitchell decided to run submerged for a while, then surface after dark and continue on snorkel. Let me describe what it's like to dive. You're at your station when the order comes, "Dive, dive," and then that damned alarm starts blaring. A rapid, mechanical buzzing. I'll tell you this, during the war, that was the sound I hated most. Every time it went off, it meant leaving the sun, the air, the human world, and sealing yourself inside a steel coffin, letting millions of tons of ocean press you down into the abyss. By the time we reached about 90 feet, sonar was already active. I was one of the most experienced operators aboard, been at that station nearly 2 years. I could identify over 30 different propeller signatures. I could tell the composition of the seabed from echoes. Hell, I could estimate a target's speed and tonnage just from how the signal decayed on the screen. That's not bragging. That's survival. At 90 feet, the water had already turned into that endless, ink-dark green. The periscope was still usable, but Mitchell rarely relied on it at that depth. He preferred sonar and radar. I still remember something he said. At this depth, the eyes are the least reliable organ. Water distorts everything. Your ears, your instruments, those are real. I respected him. But that afternoon, I started to question that. At 1,521 hours, I picked up a signal. Hold on. Let me explain what it's like to be a sonar operator down there. You wear thick headphones, cutting out most of the noise inside the boat, but not all of it. You still hear things. The low-frequency vibration of the diesel engines, the faint metallic friction of the propeller shaft turning, steam and condensation moving through pipes, muffled conversations from some distant compartment. All of it blends into a constant, low hum. But your ears are trained to filter that out, to focus on the faint echoes returning from the deep. The principle of sonar is simple. You send out a pulse, wait for it to hit something and bounce back. That return tells you distance, bearing, size, even material. But at 300 feet, sound speed in water is affected by temperature, salinity, pressure, all constantly changing. So sonar isn't an exact science. It's more like an art. You have to feel the sound, not just analyze it. And what I felt that afternoon, I had never felt before. At first, it was faint, like something very far away. I thought it might be seabed clutter, or some distortion caused by an uncharted thermocline. But slowly, I began to notice something wrong. The signal had no Doppler effect. If you're not familiar, let me explain. When an object moves, the frequency of the sound it reflects changes, like a train whistle shifting pitch as it passes you. It's a fundamental law of physics. If something's moving toward you, the frequency rises. Moving away, it drops. That's one of the most basic ways a sonar operator determines direction. But this signal, its frequency never changed. No matter how I adjusted the beam, no matter how many pulses I sent, the return stayed exactly the same. That meant one of two things. Either the object was perfectly stationary relative to us, or it wasn't any physical object I understood. A completely stationary object, 300 feet down, in the currents of the North Atlantic? Impossible. Anything down there either drifts or moves under its own power. There is no third option. But this thing, it didn't drift. It didn't move in any predictable way. It just sat there, a small, steady blip on the screen, neither approaching nor receding, as if it were nailed to that exact coordinate. So I did what any sonar operator would do. I recalibrated everything. I checked the wiring, tested pulse strength, even swapped out my headset for the backup set. Everything checked out. The equipment was fine. Then I started to doubt myself. Maybe my ears were tired. Maybe after 72 straight hours on watch, I was experiencing auditory fatigue. That wasn't unusual during long submerged patrols. Under constant, monotonous stimulation, the human senses begin to drift. There's even a term for it in military psychology, sensory drift. I'd heard of it in training, but I'd never experienced it firsthand. That afternoon I did. I didn't report it to the bridge right away. That's procedure, and experience talking. Until you're certain a signal is real, you don't bother the commanding officer with it, especially in a combat zone. False alarms waste time, and worse, they can lead to disastrous decisions. So I chose to keep observing. The next 40 minutes were the longest 40 minutes I ever spent aboard a submarine. The signal didn't change, but I did. Not in a logical way, not the kind of shift where you think, I've discovered something new. It was deeper than that, more primitive, something rising from a part of the brain long buried under civilization. My skin started to prickle, not from cold, more like that subtle pull you feel in your feet when you stand at the edge of a cliff and look down, as if something below is tugging at you. That's what it felt like. Not on my feet, on my skin. I tried to describe what I was hearing to the assistant sonar operator sitting next to me, a kid named Jack Morrison, 19 years old, first patrol. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, then said something I've never forgotten. "McCormick, you're white as a sheet." I touched my face. I wasn't cold, but my hand was shaking. Let me explain the atmosphere inside a submarine during a war patrol. It's different. Everyone is doing their job. No idle chatter. No jokes. Even footsteps are deliberately softened. Stay in that environment long enough, and you develop a kind of heightened sensitivity. You can feel other people's emotions the way you might smell something in the air. Anxiety, fear, exhaustion, they have a scent. They hang in the compartment like a thin mist, and you breathe them in without realizing it. Your body reacts. And that afternoon, 300 feet down, I started to smell it. Not from my crewmates. They were fine. Normal. It was coming from outside. From the cold water. From that steady, unmoving point on the sonar screen. At 16:02, Commander Mitchell came down from the control room and stood behind me. He didn't usually do that. He was the kind of man who stayed on the bridge, trusted his officers to handle their departments. But that day, he came down, stood there, and said nothing. I could feel him looking at my screen. I could feel his eyes on that tiny point. "McCormick," he said quietly. So quietly only I could hear him. "How long have you been tracking this contact?" 40 minutes, sir." "Report." I told him everything I knew. Range roughly 5,000 yards. Bearing steady. No Doppler effect. No identifying characteristics. Not any known vessel, submarine, or natural object. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then he asked something that sent a chill straight down my spine. "What do you think it is?" That's not a question a commanding officer asks a sonar operator. He's supposed to ask, "Can you confirm?" Or, "Do we need to change course?" Not "What do you think?" There's no place for think in the chain of command. But he asked it. And I, 5 years in the Navy, thousands of contacts logged, a veteran operator, I couldn't answer him. Because I didn't know. I knew what it wasn't. Not a U-boat. Not a surface ship. Not a whale. Not anything I'd ever encountered in training. But what it was, I had no idea. "All I can say, sir, I don't know." Mitchell stood there a moment longer, then turned and went back to the control room. He didn't order a course change. Didn't raise alert status. He did what any rational, experienced submarine commander would do. He ignored it. Because in those waters, anything unknown could be a trap. The Germans had used acoustic decoys, underwater sound devices designed to mimic large fleets, luring Allied subs into ambushes. Mitchell probably thought that's what it was. But if it were a decoy, it should have been making noise. This signal didn't make any. It just was. Silent. Stable. Like something existing in another dimension, leaving only a shadow in our ocean. At 1,700 hours, we changed course according to plan, moving into the next phase of our patrol route. I felt a wave of relief. The signal disappeared from the screen. My skin returned to normal. My hands stopped shaking. I told myself it was over. I even started to laugh at myself, a seasoned operator, rattled by some unknown echo. Maybe it was a type of deep-sea jellyfish I'd never encountered. Maybe a dense school of fish creating a collective return. There's plenty in the ocean we haven't catalogued. That doesn't make it supernatural. That night, we ran at snorkel depth, about 40 feet. We raised the snorkel mast above the surface, let the diesel engines draw air, and recharged the batteries. It's one of the most vulnerable states for a submarine. The snorkel can give away your position, but it's necessary. Without power, you can't stay submerged. I had the night watch, 2000 to 0400, sitting at the sonar station, listening to the dark. The Atlantic at night is quiet, especially underwater. You hear things, distant propellers from some freighter, maybe the edge of a convoy route. Sometimes whales, their low, drawn-out songs, like something echoing from the core of the earth. And then there are the smaller sounds, unidentifiable, scattered, thermal layers shifting. Maybe geological activity on the seabed. But around 0100, I heard something new. Let me try to describe it. It didn't come through the sonar. That's important. It wasn't a reflected pulse. It wasn't something I transmitted and received back. It came directly through the hull. Like something enormous, something invisible, had pressed itself against the submarine and begun to vibrate. It was a hum. Not mechanical. Not like an engine or a pump. It had rhythm. Almost like breathing. It resonated through the hull, through the steel, through the insulation, through the chair I was sitting in, into my bones. My teeth started to buzz. My eyes, I could feel them trembling in their sockets at an unnatural frequency. I took off my headset, trying to confirm whether the sound was internal. All systems were normal. Engine room reported everything running smoothly. No one else heard it. The frequency was too low for most human ears. But my body felt it. Every part of me was vibrating, just slightly, like I'd been placed inside a massive, invisible tuning fork. And then the sonar screen lit up. Not like a normal contact. The entire phosphorescent background of the display took on a faint, even glow. Like someone had lit a lamp behind the screen, and the light was bleeding through the coating, spreading into a soft, green haze. I stared at it for a few seconds. And then I saw something that made me forget how to breathe. The glow began to contract. Not like a signal spreading from a point, but the entire haze shrinking inward, as if an unseen hand were compressing it. Within seconds, it collapsed into a single point. Same position as that afternoon. Same range. Same absence of Doppler effect. But it wasn't just a point anymore. It started to move. Slowly. Very slowly. So slowly you might not notice it, unless you were like me, staring at that screen with every nerve stretched to the breaking point. It was moving toward us at about 2 to 3 knots. Not directly, more in an arc, like something alive, something cautious, edging closer. It would move a few dozen yards, then stop, then move again, then stop again. Like it was watching us. I picked up the voice tube and said, as calmly as I could, "Bridge sonar. I have a contact. Bearing 170, range approximately 4,000 yards. It is closing. Repeat, it is closing slowly." Silence for a few seconds. Then Mitchell's voice. "Classify. Unable to classify, sir. Not any known vessel. Repeat, unable to classify." Another pause. "Maintain contact." That was the order. Maintain contact. No attack. No course change. Nothing. That might reveal our intentions. Just watch. Wait. Because in the North Atlantic, in the middle of the night, in waters that could be hiding U-boats, any rash move could get you killed. So I watched. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. The contact kept approaching in that irregular, almost hesitant pattern. Every 15 or 20 minutes, it would stop, hover in place for several minutes, then start moving again. Sometimes it would veer off, trace a wide arc, then return to its original path. It was like, I don't know how to put it, like it was thinking. Like something with awareness was deciding whether to approach this steel thing that had descended into its world. The range kept shrinking. 3,500 yards. 3,000. 2,500. I could feel the crew starting to notice something was wrong. No one said a word, but the silence changed. Daytime silence is focused, purposeful. The silence at 3 in the morning? That's different. It's rigid. It's the kind where everyone holds themselves still, even their breathing, as if movement alone might draw attention. You know that feeling? When you're in the dark and you know something is getting closer, but you don't know what it is. You're not even sure it's real, but your body is already preparing for it. At 0311, the contact suddenly accelerated. Not gradually, instantly, from near stationary to high speed. In less than 10 seconds, it closed from 2,000 yards to under 500. I didn't even have time to react. Didn't have time to report it. My body reacted before my mind did. I shot out of my chair, headset slipping off. My whole body jolted like I'd been hit with electricity. Not from fear, from the sound. That low-frequency hum exploded in intensity. It wasn't a faint vibration through the hull anymore. It filled the compartment. It filled my chest, my skull. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside me. I could hear it, and feel it, like a cold serpent sliding down my spine, coiling at the base, pulsing with a nauseating, steady rhythm. I'd been through hell in the Navy. Depth charges detonating less than 100 feet away. The whole boat shaking like a fist had grabbed it. Destroyers hunting us, engines cut, sitting at 200 feet, listening to propellers above like the blade of a scythe. Those moments were terrifying, but it was a clean kind of fear. Physical. Your body preparing to fight or run. Adrenaline surging. Heart pounding. This wasn't that. This was something else. This was existential. The kind of fear you feel when you realize everything you understand about reality might be wrong. When the entire framework of your world starts to collapse. And then I started to see things. Let me be clear. What I'm about to describe may not have been seeing, in the usual sense. At 300 feet, there is no external light. The periscope was down. No windows. No way for light to enter. So physically, I couldn't have seen anything. But I did. It was something beyond vision. Maybe my brain, under the influence of that vibration, began processing information in a way I don't understand, translating it into images. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm just telling you what I experienced. The dark water, the cold, endless black, was no longer dark. It began to glow, not brightly. A faint, green bioluminescence, like disturbed microorganisms deep in the ocean. But this light didn't come from organisms. It came from it. It was huge. That was the first thing my mind grasped. Not big, in any normal sense, but vast in a way that broke scale itself. Bigger than our submarine. Much bigger. It was off our port side, maybe 300 feet away. I saw its outline emerge from that green glow, like a submerged mountain rising out of darkness. But it wasn't a mountain. It had structure, organization. I saw curves, shapes, almost geometric, but not any geometry I recognized. There was symmetry, but not human symmetry. Not bilateral, not radial. Something more complex. Something I couldn't describe. Like a higher dimensional structure forcing itself into our three-dimensional world, appearing warped, incomplete. At its center was a point of light. Not a lamp. Not fire. Nothing familiar. It had no color, and yet contained all colors. When I stared directly at it, it seemed deep blue. In the corner of my eye, it shifted to a warm amber. It pulsed, slowly, rhythmically, and every pulse synchronized with that vibration inside my body. Then I heard something else. Not the hum. Something like language, but not any human language. It was made of layers, deep tones like a cello, sharp metallic highs, and frequencies in between that I couldn't place. All of them overlapping, forming something like a chorus, but infinitely more complex. Like a creature with 1,000 voices speaking 1,000 words at once, and your brain could only catch fragments. And I understood them. Not by translation. Directly. The meaning bypassed language entirely, entering my mind like something written straight into it. The words meant, "You opened it." That's what I heard. "You opened it." I don't know what it was. I don't know what opened meant, but in that moment I felt a kind of fear I had never known. Not fear of death, not fear of pain, but fear of something deeper, cosmic. Like realizing that something you did wasn't just a mistake, but a violation of some fundamental law of existence itself, and the consequences weren't yours alone to bear. I don't know how long I was in that state. Seconds, minutes. When I came to, I was on the floor. My nose was bleeding. There was a sharp ringing in my ears, like severe tinnitus. Jack Morrison was crouched beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his mouth moving, but I couldn't hear him. I could see his lips forming words, but they meant nothing. I tried to stand. My legs wouldn't respond. It was like they no longer belonged to me. I dragged myself back to the sonar station and looked at the screen. The contact was gone. The display had returned to its normal deep green. No anomalies. I adjusted gain, swept all bearings, checked every frequency. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. But the blood on my face was real. The ringing in my ears was real. And the look in my crewmate's eyes, something between fear and confusion, that was real too. I turned to Jack and said, as loudly as I could manage, "Report to the bridge. Contact lost." Jack's expression changed. Not confusion, but something else. I don't know how to describe it. Sympathy? Recognition? He said something I will never forget. "McCormick, the bridge ordered an emergency surface 3 minutes ago. We're at 80 feet now. Preparing to break the surface." 3 minutes ago. I had lost 3 minutes of time. I had been on the floor, bleeding from the nose, unconscious, and I had no memory of it at all. When we surfaced, the North Atlantic night sky was so clear it didn't look real. Stars covered everything, like someone had spilled a bucket of crushed diamonds across black velvet. I climbed up into the conning tower and stepped onto the open bridge, breathing in deep, cold, salt-heavy air. It was the sweetest air I had ever breathed, not because it was fresh, but because it belonged to my world. The surface world. The human world. A world with sky, stars, and wind. Commander Mitchell stood beside me. His face was half lit by the red glow from inside the tower. He stared out at the black ocean for a long time, then said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. "McCormick," he said, "there is nothing on the sonar recorder." I looked at him. I didn't understand what he meant. "I checked the recorder for every contact you reported," he continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, like a routine log entry. "The signal you reported that afternoon, during the time you went to the head, shows nothing. And everything you reported tonight is absent as well. No contacts. No anomalies. Nothing." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. It felt like my throat had been sealed shut. Mitchell kept staring at the sea. Then he turned and looked at me. That look, I'm telling you, that look contained more meaning than any words I've ever heard in my life. It wasn't a commanding officer assessing a subordinate. It was one human being checking whether another had seen something unspeakable. "Your report," he said, "will not appear in the patrol log." I nodded. I didn't ask why, because I already knew. Because if you're a submarine commander and you submit a report that says your sonar operator made contact in the North Atlantic at 300 feet with an unknown entity, one with no Doppler signature, no acoustic profile, one that leaves no trace on recording equipment, one that causes nosebleeds and a 3-minute lapse in consciousness. Do you know what happens next? They send you to psychological evaluation. They isolate your sonar operator. They question your command judgment. Worst case, you're removed from patrol duty entirely and reassigned to some shore posting where you spend the rest of the war filling out ammunition logs until you lose your mind. So we said nothing. Mitchell said nothing. I said nothing. Jack Morrison said nothing. Everyone aboard the Mullet that night said nothing. We returned to New London and submitted a standard patrol report. It was clean, ordinary, sinkings, depth charge attacks, routine combat entries. Everything except that night. Not a single word. 78 years have passed. I am 92 years old now. Commander Mitchell died in 1978. He never spoke of it, not even to his wife. Jack Morrison died in 1955 in a car accident. I don't know if he ever told anyone. The others, those still alive, I don't know if they remember. Maybe they do. Maybe, like me, they buried it somewhere deep inside and told themselves it was a nightmare, a hallucination, a trick of deep-sea pressure, something that never happened. But I'm sitting here now, in this farmhouse in Vermont, speaking into a recorder, and I'm telling you this, it was not a hallucination. I know it wasn't, because in the 30 years that followed, after I left the Navy, after I returned to civilian life, I searched everything I could find. I contacted other submarine veterans, men who had served in the North Atlantic and the Pacific. Some refused to speak. Their silence was an answer. Some did speak, after long pauses, saying only, "Were you there too?" before hanging up. Some spoke at length, but what they described was so fragmented, so contradictory, so far outside any rational framework, that I could never be certain whether they saw what I saw, or whether they were simply experiencing another form of deep-sea madness. But then I found a file, a declassified Navy document on post-war sonar research, an appendix titled * Compendium of Unclassified Acoustic Phenomena. * It listed every unexplained sonar contact reported by U.S. submarines between 1942 and 1953. 47 incidents. 47. Across the North Atlantic, the Pacific, even the Mediterranean. Different years, different boats, different operators. But the descriptions were disturbingly similar. Contacts with no Doppler effect. Signals that left no trace on recording equipment. Low-frequency vibrations causing physiological reactions, nosebleeds, unconsciousness, and a sense of indescribable fear. The last page was handwritten, rushed, as if written in haste. It said, "Further study recommended. However, before any investigation is conducted, ensure that the act of observation itself does not attract the phenomenon. Preliminary assessment suggests possible sentience." Repeat, possible sentience. Sentience. The thing at 300 feet knew we were there. It observed us. It approached us. It sent us a message, something about opening it. I don't know what it was. I don't know what opening means. But I suspect that even now, 78 years later, in the deepest trenches where human sonar has never reached, in waters still untouched by our instruments, it is still there, waiting, watching. And do you know why I'm saying this now? It isn't because I no longer care what people think. It's because last year, I received a package. No return address. No signature. Just a postmark from New London, Connecticut. Inside was a photograph, a sonar screen, black and white film, yellowed edges. On it, a single contact point, and a handwritten note. SS-287, 17th Patrol, February 18, 1944, 0312 hours. Recorder shows nothing, but the camera did. Someone kept it, for 78 years, and they chose to send it to me now. So I sit here, speaking into this recorder, not to prove anything, not to convince anyone, but because if, one day, you hear a low-frequency hum that makes your teeth vibrate, if you see a sonar contact with no Doppler shift, if your body starts to fail before your mind understands why, remember this, you are not the first, and you will not be the last. Now I ask you a question, one I have carried for 78 years without answer. If what it said was true, if we did open something, then who opened it? When was it opened? What happened after? And most importantly, is it still opening? I think only the ocean at 300 feet can answer that. And the ocean never lies. But it never tells the whole truth either.